This is Horror Podcast.
Welcome to This is Horror, a podcast for readers, writers, and creators. I'm Michael David Wilson, and every episode, alongside my co-host Bob Pastorella, we chat with masters of horror about writing, life lessons, creativity, and much more. Today's guest is Tyler Jones, the author of Criterium, The Dark Side of the Room, Almost Roof, and Burn the Plans. And this is the third and final part of our conversation, but as with all of these, you can listen in any order. And in this episode, we talk a little bit about portraying addiction realistically, some of the life lessons that Tyler learned working in healthcare. We get into Burn the Plans a little bit, but I certainly want to get Tyler back on the show to talk about it in more depth. And we talk about that dichotomy as to whether to plot or to pants. But before any of that, a little bit of an advert break.
Hello. This is Sarah Pimborough. Very much looking forward to being at Horror on Main. I fully expect to see you all there. I want to see every single one of you there. Thank you very much. Very excited. Bye.
Horror on Main, a new weekend convention for the horror community. We explore all the shadows within horror entertainment, including writers and actors, but also artists, publishers, directors, and composers. We've been going to conventions for over 20 years and are changing up the little things to make the big picture amazing. Join us Memorial Day weekend 2023 in Hunt Valley, Maryland. Come to the block party and meet your new neighbors. See horroronmain.com for details.
Tried and True are done to death. It Was All a Dream, an anthology of bad horror tropes done right, revives even the most exhausted cliches with stories from some of horror's biggest names like Gemma Files, Gabino Iglesias, and Haley Piper. It Was All a Dream, an anthology of bad horror tropes done right, available October 18th anywhere you buy books online. Pre-order now. Use this code ThisIsHorror for 20% off through the month of October when you order direct from HungryShadowPress.com.
Okay, well, with that said, here it is. It is Tyler Jones on This is Horror. And when you made that decision to put Criterium out, I wonder what commercial, aesthetic, and artistic concerns did you have?
Man, you're asking good questions. Okay.
I hope so. I'm trying.
It's almost like you do this a lot.
I know.
Comes so naturally.
Yeah, it truly is a great question. Okay, it was with Criterium, first book that I'm putting out. So yeah, there was a certain way that I wanted it to be, to read, to be seen, all of it, including right down to the art, which was done by the wizard David Mack.
It's so good.
A well-known. Yeah, he's
so
phenomenal. And I'm so eternally grateful that he agreed to do that, because it just captured that book perfectly. Like, that artwork and that story to me just go hand in hand. But I wanted it to have some depth, some substance, but I wanted it to be fun. And one of my all-time favorite writers is Joe Hill. And I think that that's something he does really well. He puts the pedal to the metal and tells a really good story. And so I wanted it to have that sort of feel. Like, and I wanted it to feel like from page one that, I don't know how else to say this, like you're in good hands, especially when it's the first publication you're putting out. Like, you're hoping that people, when they open the book, that it doesn't feel like something half-assed. I wanted it to feel like some love and some care went into this package, into this book, into this story, the whole thing. I hope it looks nice on your shelf, and I hope that you enjoy what's on the inside. Like, I really did think about that, and then at the end of the day just thought, you know what, I told the best story that I could in the best way that I could, and now it's time to just put it out and hope that it finds the right readers.
Yeah.
But I wanted it to have some energy, like here's me, here's what I do, and if you like this book, maybe you'll like the next one too.
Yeah. Yeah. And was this one of the stories that you workshopped in your group with Chuck?
Yeah, it was actually. It was originally a short story, and it felt like too long of a short story, and also not long enough. So in workshop, I would only ever bring in short stories, just because it gets a little too the feedback you get from your fellow writers becomes a little less useful when you're bringing in chapters of something, like you bring in a chapter and a couple weeks go by and they're trying to remember what happened in the last chapter, and scenes and objects and characters and all that stuff and tension that you're trying to build. It kind of all falls apart, at least for me, if you're bringing in a novel. So I only brought in short stories, and it was originally a short story, but it was kind of long. Like, I think it was approaching like 10,000 words, which is a bit long for a short story, but it also didn't have enough room to breathe. And that one, yeah, I just felt like it needed to be told in a larger space. So I took some of the feedback that I received and incorporated that, and then expanded the story into 3 or 4 times its length.
And I mean, one of the themes, of course, is addiction. So I wonder, what did you draw upon, whether real life experience or other art forms, to portray that in as realistic light as possible? Which, I mean, you succeeded masterfully.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it was twofold, 2 things. Number one, I work in healthcare, which I see all kinds of people in all kinds of situations, and it gave me an awareness of addiction in a pharmaceutical sense. And we're at an interesting point in our history as a culture in which we are moving from overdose deaths and addiction problems, moving from street drugs to pharmaceuticals. And we've kind of reached this peak where you see, the overdose death numbers that came out recently within the last couple of months were like primarily fentanyl, which is a prescription medication. So we're moving beyond this like heroin and cocaine and even meth to an extent into pharmaceutical medications being sold on the streets and causing significant death. So anyway, long story short, I saw this happen in a number of patients who became addicted to pain meds unintentionally, meaning they had some injury that caused them pain, and sometimes they'd have to wait 6 weeks or so before a surgery, and then in the meantime, they'd be taking these pain meds, and they'd never go out on the street and try to score heroin, but they're given heroin in a pill by their doctor. Same stuff, and then they realize like it awakens something in them. Like, I like this. I don't hurt so much, not just physically, but like emotionally, spiritually. I'm not in as much pain. And the addiction persisted even beyond the surgery. And I saw this happen with a number of people that got me really thinking about that deeply. And then the other part of it was just being a dad and looking at my kids and worrying, like we were talking about being honest with ourselves and doing soul searching and looking at my own flaws and wondering which parts of me end up in my kids. And is it hereditary? Is it passed on through genetics, or is it behavior? Like if they see me get frustrated at every little thing, do they end up becoming frustrated at every little thing? Like what is it in my life and in my behavior and how I act that influences who they will become and what flaws they'll have? And then you just naturally started thinking about, man, what would it be like if you grew up in a home where your dad's addicted to pain meds or addicted to drugs in general, just addiction in general? And that kind of took off from there and became the story that it did. And you guys know how it goes when you're writing a story. There's certain elements that you put there intentionally, and then they sort of grow threads and connect, and subconsciously you're telling a story that it's almost like it was just there and you're simply writing it down.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes it does just feel like we're almost excavating. So like you say, they're found stories. They're waiting to be found by us. That's our job. We're a kind of literary archaeologist.
Yeah. Yeah. And I wanted to make sure, like, as I was talking about my working in healthcare, like I didn't, when you're working with patients, like there is no judgment, you know, I'm always curious about people and how they end up where they end up, but it's like, I'm there to take care of a patient. I'm not there to counsel anybody. So therefore I end up having an enormous amount of compassion for these people that I meet in the situations they find themselves in, whether it's because of their own decisions or whether it's because of something else. But I wanted to make sure that that was a part of it, that we're not talking about like, ew, drug addicts on the street, ew. No, we're just talking about humans who have a problem, and we all have them. This just happens to be this particular problem that we're addressing in this story. But it was really important to me that I'm talking about people struggling, not going. Yeah, I didn't want to make it just a thing that's happening to someone else. You know, the guy with a cardboard sign that you pass on the freeway asking for money, you know, where you can just drive by and ignore it. No, this is people. These are people that we know. And I'm sure that many of us know addicts, and we probably know addicts without even knowing that we do.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, of course, towards the start of the conversation, I asked you about life lessons growing up, but I'm wondering, what life lessons have you gleaned specifically from working in healthcare?
Oh man, healthcare is such a strange environment, and it's populated by a bunch of strange people. Like no joke, I was actually thinking about this the other day. I was at work on Friday, and like I just witnessed some just crazy circumstances and a lot of death and violence within the hospital. And I thought, man, it's what a strange thing for like the human mind to, and I'm sure there are other vocations like that as well, where you find your brain like almost reprogramming itself to deal with and cope with the insane amounts of sadness that you see. Man, I think I've gained a greater understanding of, I have just a lot of compassion for people in the situations that they find themselves in. I think one lesson in particular, maybe the most important, is, and I was actually talking about this the other day with my youngest son, that we can have a tendency to react in exaggerated ways to things that are not very important, whether it's traffic or not getting the parking spot close enough to the grocery store, or someone said this to me and just making a really big deal about it, and how it can affect our mood and our countenance and how we treat other people. And then I go into the hospital, and like I'll go to the oncology ward, and I will meet people with terminal cancer. Like they are not going to be alive for much longer. And some of them are young, like, 40s. And I see how they treat people, the smile on their face, the way that they are completely accepting of their fate and determined to go with dignity and grace. And they're in an enormous amount of pain, and yet they're still treating everybody with respect. Like, what's my excuse? And again, I don't mean it to sound cliche, like, oh, somebody else has it worse, but there is truth to that. And I think that that's just perspective, but I get to see it in a very real life way. Like, I'm holding the hand of somebody who's going to die, and there's no question about it. They do in a couple months. And I'm seeing how they are processing life and how they are living right then in that moment in enormous amounts of pain. And it's really, really over the years. I mean, I've been in healthcare for 20 years. It's influenced how I view my own problems, my own struggles. Like, there is a way to handle this with grace and courage and dignity and kindness. I don't need to take anything out on anyone. So that perspective is really invaluable, I think. And I'm lucky to have it. I'm lucky to work in an environment where I do get that.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think your mother working in healthcare was something that kind of pulled you towards a career in healthcare?
Possibly, probably, but in ways that I don't fully recognize. But yeah, for sure. I mean, when she worked in healthcare, yeah, I would visit her at the hospital, have lunch with her. So it was always a familiar environment. So it seemed natural to follow into that. Yeah, absolutely. And she's an incredibly compassionate woman who just has devoted her life to helping people. So yeah, if I dug into it enough, I'm sure that that's the reason, I'm sure.
Yeah. Is that the vocation you've always had, or was there something in between, school and then healthcare?
Oh yeah, man, I've worked all kinds of odd jobs. Concrete work, landscaping. I worked at a nursery, radio DJ for a little while, all kinds of stuff.
Mm.
Handyman, painter, but primarily healthcare. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think in terms of the writing, would you like to move towards doing that full time if you could, or would you want to kind of have a part-time writing, part-time in another industry? Because I mean, there's pros and cons to everything, and I think the biggest con about writing full-time is if you're not careful, if you're not intentional, then it can be that isolation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. In fact, recently, I actually cut back my hours a little bit at the hospital in order to write more. I have several projects that are on deadlines that I have to work on, and I just didn't have enough time. And so I made the decision with the support of my wife and my family just to step back a little bit and focus on writing more, give myself the time to work on the things I need to work on, but also continue to work. And I think that that's important. It is nice to be able to step into a work environment, and it's important to, I think, keep a foot in real life, because otherwise everything is just invention. And I think I think it has the potential to cause you to lose touch with reality in terms of how people live and behave, and just the real emotions of people. And in a hospital, like, you are surrounded by nothing but emotions.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think Chuck has it right when, to immerse himself in that kind of thing, he'll write in emergency rooms. I mean, maybe people who work in emergency rooms would argue that they'd prefer he didn't, but it's just, immersing yourself in real life, in conflict to a point, in real stakes. Because, yeah, if you're just in your room, if you're effectively in solitary, well, like you say, it's just the imagination, and the imagination is important, but it'll only take you so far.
Right. Yeah. And I think a really perfect example of that are politicians.
Right.
Everybody agrees politicians are out of touch with the people they represent. How does that happen? You remove yourself from those people and you rarely, if ever, interact with them. So their concerns, their hopes, their fears, all of that is some really distant bell that you can't even hear anymore.
Mm.
And I think the same could be true of writing, that if you're too distant from reality and the real struggles, not like you're above it, but you know what I mean? The interacting with it in a very tangible way, be outside your own home. I mean, wherever you live, you're part of a community, whether you like it or not. And to be aware of what's happening within your community, I think makes you a better human, but also probably a better artist as well.
Mm. Yeah.
Like we were talking about Oasis, in that whole era of Britpop. Like if you really dig into it, all of that era of music was like blue collar, poor kids with crappy instruments writing songs to get out of where they were.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And there's something really, really valuable and alive about that. It's got some urgency to it.
Yeah. Well, I think the vast majority of good music genres, they come out of, poor circumstances or conflict or dissatisfaction.
Yeah. Yeah. Kicking against something, whether it's internal or external.
Yeah. It makes sense because, if you're just living a kind of really happy life, are you going to want to kind of create a revolution, as it were?
Right.
I don't know. It's a difficult one because, I don't think we should glorify the starving artist. I think some people do. I don't think they would if they knew the kind of realities of it. But there is something to be said for, when your back's against the wall, creating good art.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Exactly. And not just art for people whose circumstances are all fine and dandy. I think it's been a couple years now, but a show was made of Joe Hill's novel Nosferatu.
Mm-hmm.
I never saw the show, but I love that book. It's one of my favorite books. I try to read it like once a year. And when the show came out, Stephen King tweeted something that has stuck with me ever since. He said I'm paraphrasing here, but that the show does something that very few shows do anymore, which is how did he put it? It shows you a blue collar family with blue collar problems.
Yeah.
And does so with compassion, not looking down on them. And that's something the book did as well. And I loved that because I don't know. That's my heart, I mean, that's my, that's me. That's where I come from. So I really reacted and responded to that. Like, yes, that's so important, is to not just depict people who live in New York or London or wherever, and they're rich young artists or whatever. Like, tell me about the guy who works at the gas station.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then he encounters some supernatural thing. Like,
right.
That guy's way more interesting.
I was going to say, you can equate it to music in a sense that, I mean, think about this. Think about every manufactured band that's ever happened. And you know the bands I'm talking about.
Oh, yes, I do.
They all have one thing in common.
They don't play instruments.
They don't play instruments. Okay. That's one. and 2, they all break up. Pretty much every manufactured band that has ever happened will do 2 to 3 albums. They break up almost like clockwork. So 10
Yeah.
years later, they can have the reunion tour. And then bands break up all the time, but new members come in and things like that. And when you have people who can create something from nothing compared to people who have everything trying to create something to cash in, you can tell the difference. There's no fucking substance there.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There's it doesn't feel quite real.
Exactly. There's no authenticity to it. Whereas when you have writers and you have creators, there's something to be said about people who take nothing and create something that can be timeless. I mean, a great example is The Thing. I mean, I think, John Carpenter, did like multiple mortgages on his house just to make the movie, and didn't make a splash when it hit, but now it's considered, a classic film done literally on a shoestring budget. And the appeal of that film now is massive. And you see these manufactured bands, I could care less about them because there's no substance there.
Right. Yeah, there's no substitute for substance.
Mm-hmm.
Agreed.
Yeah, and I think it's no surprise that you mentioned Nosferatu, because I think there are many parallels, and in a way, I could see if you were pairing books together, you might well put Criterium and Nosferatu together.
That's very cool. Yeah, that'd be a cool pairing, huh?
Yeah.
Dinner and dessert.
Yeah, but I kind of like this idea of pairing books together, particularly like a really fucking long book and a short one. So it is dinner and dessert. That's exactly what it is.
Even the artwork has some similarities, like the stark white and the reds. Yeah, that's cool. And I'm a big fan of the idea of certain works being in conversation with other works as well. Like almost written, you can see, as we know as artists, when you're excited by another artist's work and you want to go create your own as a reaction to it, not to try and top it, but just in that electricity of being inspired by what someone else has done. Like, I want to create something too that has that same kind of feel.
Yeah.
I love rereading books for that very reason. Like I've got a couple projects that I'm working on, and I've made these stacks of books to read while I'm working on those projects specifically, because that's the kind of feel that I want to go for. So I see like what I'm working on is in conversation with that. Like saying, "Hey, Josh Mallerman, I love what you did in Goblin. I'm going to try and do something that's like totally different, but I love how you told the story. I love the characters. I love these ideas that you're playing with. Now I want to riff off that."
Yeah. And I think in conversation with is such a great way of putting it in terms of these pairings.
Yeah.
But, talking about Criterium, I mean, I understand that your process with that one is that you pantsed it. So you weren't sure where it was going any more than Zach was. But then if we contrast this with The Dark Side of the Room, you had the ending before anything else. So, I mean, I'm wondering, now as things stand, and perhaps having an agent and publishers, it might be a little bit different. But, I mean, do you tend to plan? Do you tend to what we term pants? Is it a kind of amalgamation of the two, or does it purely depend on the project?
Another great question. Yeah, depends on the project. So, yeah, Criterium, totally pantsed. I wanted to be along for the ride. I never plot anything. As time has gone on, I will make notes to myself occasionally. Um, if I'm being like 100% honest, okay, there's a project I can't talk about it yet, like in specifics, but I'm working on a book right now that'll be coming out next year, early next year, and I had to pitch this book, and I had an idea that I was really excited about, and the publisher got really excited about the idea too, and agreed to publish it. And then I freaked out because I had no clue where it was going to go. All I had was like this really very general idea. And the idea was exciting, but the story wasn't there. And that really freaked me out, is because there was this deadline and I didn't have the scaffolding for it. Like, okay, there's an idea. It's like, it'd be like saying Star Wars, there's an empire and there's a rebellion and it takes place in space. Like, okay, that's a cool idea, but what's the story?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I pitched, was this idea without a story. And so that one I was really freaking out about. And then I just spent some time almost in meditation mode, like just sitting, thinking. And I had some breakthroughs, just a couple visuals, really, just a couple simple ideas that were enough to say, okay, now that's a point I can get to. And then if I can get to that point, then I can move to the next point. Like, there's going to be story in between these points. So it does depend on the project. Midas, I had no clue where it was going. None at all. I was as surprised about the things that occur within that book as anyone. In fact, that book started with a single image of a horse walking out of a mist, like a fog, a really, really thick fog. And this horse head comes out of the mist, and someone's watching it walking, waiting to see who's riding it. And then as the horse fully emerges, this person realizes there is no rider on the horse, but it's saddled. And from there, that, like, I just went. Almost Ruth was the same way. I had no clue where that was going. The Dark Side of the Room, an image flashed into my head that turned out to be the ending. And so that book became a sprint to find out how we get to that point, which was also a process of discovery, but unique in the sense that I did know where it ended. And not to bore you, but like more and more with a couple projects that I have coming up, I am seeing where they go more now. Yeah. Meaning I have a vague idea of the ending, but I'm not fully committed to it. So it's like I have a general idea of the direction we're moving in, but I don't know how we're going to get there. I don't know what happens along the way. And whether we end up at that original idea, I don't know. But it's given me like, it's almost like pedaling a bike. You know, like when you first get on a bike, it's harder to start the pedals going. And then once you're moving, the momentum carries you. Yeah. So it's like I need something that motivates me to start moving the pedals.
Yeah. Just don't get on a bike if you find yourself in Criterium.
Right. If it's a bright red bike, leave it alone.
Yeah. But I wonder, as sometimes you see the ending and sometimes you don't. I mean, those times where you don't, do you think you feel more fear and dread, as you said you've experienced before? Or do you think typically you feel more excitement because, you know, you're going to get on that bike and the possibilities are endless?
Yeah, I do. I love the excitement of that. I love the discovery process. I love it makes sitting down to write each day an absolute joy. I love it anyway. I absolutely love it. I find so much joy in the actual process because I'm telling myself the story first and foremost. So I'm excited. And then, like with the one I was mentioning that really scared me. Part of that is that story will belong to a publisher, and I want to do right by them. And so there's that pressure as well. Whereas, like, say with Almost Ruth, which is a novel, I could write that at my own pace, and there was no pressure. And once I was happy with it, I could put it out. So it does feel a little different, and maybe that's just me psyching myself out with this new thing that I'm working on. But who knows? Like, there is that pressure of, I want this to be good, not just for me, but for the publisher. I want to do right by them. I want to give them something that they like and that I'm proud of.
Yeah.
And with that, I'm also, as I write more and more, I want to experiment with different methods as well. Like, at some point, I'd love to really write an outline of sorts and write to it. Like, maybe actually give a whole lot of thought to how the story's going to go before I write it out, and not follow it like paint by numbers. But I'm open to trying anything. Like, I just want to continue to improve and write the best that I can. So I don't want to just keep doing what I've always done because it works for me. I want to be a little uncomfortable in the process as well. I do like that pressure I'm finding.
Yeah, I think if we're too comfortable, there's perhaps something might be missing. I think the sweet spot is somewhere between absolute discomfort and comfort.
Yeah, I think you're probably right about that.
I think there's a lot to say about momentum too. To me, I write like you do. I don't use an outline. I'll have notes, but once I get like the story and the angle that I want to go, and there could be quite a few startovers, but once I get there, it's this momentum carries me through, and it's discovery, it's creation, it's telling myself the story in such a way that it's like you as you do it more and more, you begin to actually set up things that you don't realize that you're going to use later.
Oh yeah,
subconscious.
You
did it. It's already there. It's like, oh well, fuck, I can use that.
Yeah.
And that's, to me, that is like, okay, I'm starting to get something here, because they have people like Joe Lansdale. He could probably write a book about how to write, but it would probably be the most difficult thing he's ever done, because I think storytelling comes naturally to him, and he knows how to do the peaks and valleys and things like that. And I think he's one of those writers that probably it just comes naturally to him. Whereas a lot of us have had to learn through trial and error and things like that, and reading books about writing. Like, how do you do this? How do I make what I've read, what I write, equal to what I've read from other people? And I think probably the key of that is that momentum, that discovery. And it's so cool to hear, your process and my process are almost the same. I'm like, okay, I'm in the right track. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's like what you were talking about, where you're almost leaving a trail of breadcrumbs for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's something really, really important about recognizing that.
Right.
Rather than saying, oh, I need to add this, I need to add that. Well, take a look at what you already have present in the story and then use that. And sometimes, we all know, as you're writing, you'll come to something and realize, oh my gosh, I have laid the groundwork for this perfectly, for this next point that I'm going to bring. And I didn't even see it coming, but subconsciously, maybe I knew that it was going in this direction, and it had to. Like, there's a story in my collection, Burn the Plans, called Full Fathom 5. And that was originally a much longer story, at least twice as long. And I reached out to the publisher, Cemetery Gates, and said, what do you guys think about releasing this as its own novella? And their response was, cut it in half, put half in the collection, and then like write a full novella using that first half of the story. And in that story, which is one of my favorite things that I've ever written, there's the way that story ends, as it is in Burn the Plans, that, at least to my mind, was subconsciously set up to where when it came, it surprised me and moved me deeply. And I realized I knew it all along, but I didn't, not in a conscious way.
Right.
And all the breadcrumbs were there. I just had to make sure that they made sense logically within the story. And it was like, it's exciting when that happens, you know? And boy, that feeling is something that, and it, you know, it's something that Tom Spanbauer would often say. He would often, he called them horses. So every book, like he used the example of back in the day, like the Oregon Trail days, where if you wanted to go from the East Coast to the West Coast, you'd take a team of horses and you used the same horses along the journey.
Right.
You didn't just constantly switch horses every time you crossed state lines. And to him, those horses were the theme of a book. So whatever you start with is what needs to carry the story through. But it also refers to objects and things that occur within the story. And so if you started piling too much into your story, he would say, like, okay, well, where's the paintbrush? Because you introduced a paintbrush and it seemed to have significance in chapter 1. And now you're talking about other things, but you haven't mentioned the paintbrush since. And so that really, it's trained me a little bit. I'm still learning constantly about how to make what I present on the page have meaning and make sure that it comes back in other ways and gains gravity with each appearance, so that I'm not constantly like overwhelming the reader with these new things. But when the paintbrush pops up again, they're like, oh yeah, that paintbrush. That's the paintbrush that the character used to paint the picture of her father right before he died. She's hung onto that paintbrush, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it has to appear organically. That's the thing. I think readers can tell when you start planting things. So it's like, to me, it's like just on the lines of recognizing what you've written before, that you're subconsciously laying out these little tools that you're going to use later, that's going to change possibly the dynamic of your story, whether it's something that's going to be internal or external, and using what you have, instead of like going, well, golly, what do I need to do now is I need to have my characters build a catapult, when you actually don't need to have them do anything. You have the mechanism there, and as you grow, you learn to recognize that. And to me, I think it's cooler when you recognize it after the fact. It's like, wait, how do I do that? Oh, well, fuck, they're already there. Okay, cool, great, I got it.
Yep. Yeah. And analyzing your own work and looking at it and going, okay, what do I have? Mm-hmm. What's on the page and what can I use and what's present, and making sure that as you're telling the story and like you mentioned, the momentum moving forward with it, making sure that you're constantly keeping those things present, whatever it is, whether it's characters, emotional ties, objects, whatever it is, using what you've already put down, because you put it down for a reason. It was important. So make sure it retains its importance throughout the story. Which maybe that's the difference between story and plot. I don't know. Maybe that's probably a question for somebody who's written a lot more books, but I think there is a distinction between story and plot. Plot seems to be like, I don't know, if you're going to write a mystery, it seems like a plot would be important because you'd have to know where things are going, maybe. But with a story, like you're just telling the story of something that's happened and it's interesting. Like you mentioned Lansdale. Lansdale, you're right, is just a natural storyteller. Like I don't care what's happening in his book, it's still interesting to me. Like there are moments in Hap and Leonard where it's just Hap and Leonard hanging out, and it's so great. Because he's just telling you the story.
Yeah, I don't know. It's like this. Oh man, I can't think of the right word. Like he's almost like a modern day folklorist,
Yeah. Yeah.
because he it's like the master of the tall tale, but he puts it on a personal level,
Yep.
And but to me, I feel like that stuff just comes naturally to him,
Oh, for sure.
and it's like, man, if you could get it and bottle it, you could sell it. And I
Yeah.
drink it, So yeah.
I know that we're coming up to the time that we've got together today, and this has been such an interesting and far-ranging conversation. I mean, I feel bad because we haven't even got into a lot of the books and really into the meat of your stories, but the things we've been talking about have been so fascinating. So, I always want to follow the conversation rather than artificially, jump into to burn the plans or whatever.
Yeah. No, this has been awesome, and don't worry about it at all.
Yeah, but I mean, the good thing is because we haven't really jumped into the stories in any depth, we need to get you back on the show at some point. And
Yeah, anytime, you guys. I would absolutely love to. This has been such an honor and a pleasure.
yeah, well, you've got Midas coming out next year. Is that right? Is there a date set?
Yeah, that'll be coming out as part of Earthling's Halloween series. So last year was Fracasse's Boys in the Valley. This year will be Marla by Jonathan Jans, and the next year will be Midas 2023. And then, like I mentioned, the Full Fathom 5 novella, that'll be coming out later this year from Cemetery Gates. We're looking at December. We haven't officially announced that yet, so I guess this is the official announcement that it'll be coming out in December. And then I've got a collection, like a really limited edition collection from Thunderstorm.
Oh, and I love Thunderstorm. They're doing such good work.
Yeah. And it's really cool. It was fun. So it's a collection called Turn Up the Sun.
Mm-hmm.
And it collects the two novellas that make up Criterium, like the complete Criterium, and the two novellas that make up the complete Dark Side of the Room, and collects them into one volume, along with a brand new novella set within the Criterium world. Yeah. So it's bringing all those stories together because they do take place within the same universe. In fact, there's like a blink and you'll miss it line in the Dark Side of the Room where the main character Betsy is watching the TV and she hears about a body that was burned alive on Archer Way, which is the street where Criterium takes place primarily. Yeah. So there's this indication that they're within the same version of Portland, Oregon. And so I thought it'd be cool to just put them all together as like all the Criterium stories, they take place on the east side of the river. There's a river that cuts through Portland that divides it in half. And the Dark Side of the Room stories take place on the west side. So it's kind of this just haunted version of Portland that ends up being collected into one volume. Yeah. And if you go on to Twitter right now, you can see, and T. Jones writer, you can see the artwork for the book, which was done by a good friend of mine named Ryan Mills, and it's phenomenal. We had so much fun putting that together, just bouncing ideas back and forth, and we wanted to pay homage to the original artwork for The Stand, Do you know the one I'm talking about that's blue? I can't remember the artist's name, but it has like the eyes with the beak.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, I
Mhm.
do.
Yeah, so we there's a front cover art and back cover art, and I wanted it to be sort of abstract but bold, and also have connections to all the stories. So it's a lot of fun to look at, and he just did an incredible job. So that'll be coming out from Thunderstorm this fall, and it'll be a really special edition too, because it includes the introductions. So Jeremy Robert Johnson wrote an introduction to the Criterium Extended Edition,
Mm.
and Fracassi wrote one for the Dark Side of the Room Extended Edition. Those will be included in this volume, and both those guys are going to sign the signature sheets for the book as well.
Oh, wow.
So it'll be a
Yeah.
really, really fun, just cool, beautiful book. In Thunderstorm, they do these oversized editions.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then later next year, Midas will be out, and boy, I hope it's something that readers connect with.
Yeah. Well, there's going to be plenty of opportunity to get you back then. You're certainly not resting. There's so much that you're doing. But I mean, it's great that you're working with Cemetery Gates Media, who I think are one of the best independent presses, about today, full stop. But
Yeah,
I mean, we didn't
and they're
even.
so author driven.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, they really genuinely care about their authors. They want to do right by their authors. They're just open to any ideas. Like, I've had lots of ideas that I've thrown at them, and the answer's been yes to everything.
Yeah.
Which is just, it's so fun because it gives you that freedom. And like, I wanted illustrations and burn the plans for every story.
Yeah.
And they're like, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
And whatever you want to do, we'll do it.
Yeah. And I don't
Okay.
imagine every press would just, respond like that. But I mean, Burn the Plans could be a great place for people to start with your fiction if they're not yet familiar. And I mean, don't take my word for it. How about the word from another Michael with 3 names, Michael Marshall Smith? And I mean, I don't think anyone could conceive of a better forward. I mean, you're getting this from one of the best writers today, and you brought him back to his early years where he has that excitement of discovering a new writer to such a point where it's infusing him with a desire to write. And I know exactly the feeling he's talking about. So I'm guessing when you read that forward, there were celebrations.
Oh man, I was absolutely floored. It was so cool. And he was the very first person to read Criterium. So I had reached out to him and asked if he'd be willing to take a look at it, and he had no clue who I was. I was just a nobody reaching out to him, and he was so gracious to agree to read it, and he offered this wonderful blurb. So it was really cool. That he was willing to write that introduction, and it has meant a lot to me.
And I mean, when you reached out to him, what was your pitch? Was there any connection, or were you literally a nobody? Was there some tenuous connection that you could bring in?
No, there was none, other than I'm a big fan of your writing, and I think I had just finished The Anomaly when I reached out to him, which he wrote under a different name, but that book is so much fun, and I absolutely devoured that book, and I just reached out to him and just said, hey, I absolutely love your work. I'd be honored if you'd be willing to take a look at this. If not, I totally understand. I imagine you're crazy busy. And he was like, no, just send it along. I'd love to take a look. And he did. It's one thing to agree. It's another thing to read it,
Yeah. Yeah. And he's such a good author. And I mean, in many senses, it's a massive anomaly that we haven't had him on the podcast yet. I want him on the podcast. I think about, it'd be good to get him on the podcast. So, the next step is bloody well writing to him and inviting him on the podcast.
Yeah, you should. You should. I assume you've listened to some interviews with him before.
I haven't actually listened to many interviews with him, mostly because if I want to interview someone, I almost want to come in quite cold to that. I want to
Oh,
devour
sure.
the fiction. I'll probably read a lot of written interviews to get some information to glean, but I almost, I'm reluctant to listen to too many because I don't want it to taint the experience, because of course, people have stories that they retell, so I want to react to that in the purest kind of way, hearing it for the first time.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, well, you should definitely reach out. He's a really thoughtful, uh yeah, he's a blast to listen to. He's very intelligent, of course, and just really
Yeah,
thoughtful in his responses. It'd be a good fit for you guys.
yeah. Okay, well, it's happening. I'll reach out to him. There you go. Well, where can our listeners connect with you?
Let's see, my website is tylerjones.net, and I've got a newsletter that you could sign up for and links to any social media. Um, yeah, I'm bad about the newsletter, but hopefully I'm going to get better at it within the next couple months.
Me too. Me too. I get it.
Apparently people like
Me
those.
three.
Yeah, yeah. All right. Do you have any final thoughts to leave our listeners with?
Yeah, final thoughts. I would say that it truly is. It has been an honor to hang out with you guys and chat with you, and I meant everything that I said about. It's just a cool full circle moment for me to have started listening to This Is Horror as a listener and someone who just loves books and writing and writers and learning from all the guests that you've had on, to now being a guest myself and getting to chat with you guys has been just an absolute thrill for me. So I'm really, really grateful for this opportunity, and it's been a blast chatting with you both.
Thank you so much for listening to our conversation with Tyler Jones. Join us again next time when we will be chatting with Jason Pargin about his new John Dies at the End book. And if you want to listen to that ahead of the crowd, if you want to listen to every episode ahead of the crowd, then become our patron at patreon.com/thisishorror. Not only do you get early bird access to each and every episode, but you can become a member of the Writers Forum on Discord. You can submit questions to each and every guest. And you get exclusive episodes such as Story Unboxed, the horror podcast on the craft of writing, and the Q&A sessions with myself and Bob Pastorella. It is only $3. That can't even get you a good cup of coffee, but it can get you a good audio dose of literary goodness. And that is why we want you to become a patron at patreon.com/thisishorror. And if you sign up this week, you can let me know, did that analogy, the kind of cup of coffee comparison, did that make you go over the edge? Did that make you become a patron? If not, what was it? Why did you join us? Let us know. All right, before I wrap up, a little bit of an advert break.
Tried and True are done to death. It was all a dream. An anthology of bad horror tropes done right revives even the most exhausted cliches with stories from some of horror's biggest names like Gemma Files, Gabino Iglesias, and Haley Piper. It was all a dream. An anthology of bad horror tropes done right. Available October 18th anywhere you buy books online. Pre-order now. Use this code ThisIsHorror for 20% off through the month of October when you order direct from HungryShadowPress.com. Horror on Main, a new weekend convention for the horror community. Exploring all the shadows of horror, our guests include writers and actors, but also artists, publishers, directors, composers, and more. We've been going to cons for over 20 years and are changing up the little things to make the big picture amazing. Beyond guests, contests, movies, panels, and podcasters, our layout and programming are designed to further incorporate the very idea of community. Join us Memorial Day weekend 2023 in Hunt Valley, Maryland. Come to the block party and meet your new neighbors. HorrorOnMain.com.
Now, recently, I've been writing some rules for life, just little things that I follow so that I have a decent time. And I find that that can be helpful, particularly if you're going through something rough, to set up rules or to set up principles, things that can guide you through the day. And here is one of my rules for life. Decide on the most important task for the day and do it as early as possible. That way, if you only achieve this, then you've already won. And let me know if that rule for life helps you out at all. If you do incorporate it, I'd love to know how you get on. Well, that about does it for another episode. But until next time with Jason Pargin, take care of yourselves, be good to one another, read horror, keep on writing, and have a great, great day.
This is Horror Podcast.